Chaos causes organizations to retreat, but not always. Disney, CNN, MTV, Hyatt, Burger King, FedEx, Microsoft, Apple, Texas Instrument, Fox, Gillette, AT&T, Autodesk, Amgen, GE, HP, Instagram, Pinterest, Slack, Square, Uber, Venmo, and Airbnb. The reason why this list is significant is that each of these companies were founded during a period of global economic recession. I'm going to explain today why it wasn't coincidental. It's not just haphazard. It's actually because the world was in a global economic recession that these companies succeeded. Chaos creates opportunity. Chaos changes the rules. Chaos reshuffles the deck. Chaos switches who is in the lead. I want to pause on this one. I want you to think about this. This is why you're dialed in today. Chaos switches who is in the lead. And here's how it works. The concept I want to introduce you today is something called chaos-induced recharting. And it comes from some of my work in the last books on chaos. And here's how it happens. We get caught in a path of familiarity, a path that lets us know what the right decisions are. And we can be in that path for years, but that path can also cause us to miss out. Then one day we experience a crisis. Crisis is bad for everyone, but crisis leads to chaos, and chaos causes a recharting of the path that you're actually in. And I started studying chaos personally about 20 years ago or so. 12 years ago, I wrote a book called Exploiting Chaos, and my timing was pretty wild. It was just like now. It was 2008, right before the world became chaotic. And all of a sudden, I started getting invited by a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs to help them reinvent through time periods of chaos. And I learned a lot from that. And what I wanted to do was think about how to take the lessons I've learned from having the fortune of working with so many people who experience chaos. And that's what I did with the new book. That's what I've done with my last decade of work. And that's what I want to share with you today. Suddenly chaos is very interesting again. So let me give you a Tony Hunter story. Now, some of you who have come to our future festivals have already heard me talk about Tony Hunter's remarkable story. So I'll do it much faster today, but I'll do it according to our chaos-induced recharting methodology. So Tony Hunter was the publisher of the Chicago Tribune for 27 years. For 27 years, the guy got up, went to work, and published a great paper in an iconic city. He loved his job, and everything was smooth and consistent. But then one day, crisis started happening. The digital disruption started going down, and Tribune was suddenly in a lot of trouble. And when that happened, Tony was asked if he could come and become CEO. Promoted to CEO, and they asked him to declare bankruptcy, to fire 20% of his friends, and to turn the paper around. That's terrible. That's crisis. And it's what many of us have been thinking or going through right now, depending on what organization or market that you're actually in. But crisis leads to chaos, and chaos creates brand new opportunities. Tony obsessed about what he could do. He went through all the patterns and workshops and ideas. I had the privilege of working through this with him and understanding how his brain worked as he thought about how to find new opportunity. And guess what? He did it. He recharted. And by a year or two into his post-bankruptcy era, Tony turned the Chicago Tribune from bankruptcy to the most profitable news organization in America. From bankruptcy to the most profitable news organization in America. That's wild. And that effectively means he found a way to rechart his path. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But I want to think about the alternate paths that you could be on. We're in a terrible and difficult time, but I want today to be about your opportunity. I want today to be inspiring, exciting. I want today for you to fast forward a year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 years to think about what opportunities are so close within your grasp. And I promise this field would tell you there's a lot that you could be doing. It might be a bigger role, a new product, a new service idea, or just a different way of doing things. But the simplicity is that everyone on this call, even the virtue, the fact you dialed in, you have another level that you could be performing at. So let's go through some lessons in history then. This is Michelangelo's David. This is the roof of the Sistine Chapel. Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. the Gutenberg printing press, the invention of bookkeeping, which led to many aspects of modern day banking, Sir William Shakespeare, the roof of St. Peter's Basilica, maps, and the scientific method. What makes each of these innovations unique, in addition to the fact that the world, is that all of these things happened at the same time period. These all happened from the Renaissance period. And what makes the Renaissance period so significant is that the Renaissance emerged from the bubonic plague. And the bubonic plague was a terrible time. It was a lot different than what we're experiencing now. The world lost a third of its population. In total, we lost 200 million people. And if you look at this little infographic and then drop us into what we're threatened by and experiencing today, well, COVID-19 is so far about 80,000 deaths. And I don't want to belittle it. These are real people. These are real humans. It's impacting all of us. And that 80,000 could very well turn into 1 million. But even if 80,000 turns into 1 million, it's still not 200 million, and it's still not half of the human race. And yet we're very much impacted by it. So what do we learn from this, and where are we now? We had a pretty wild run. We had almost a 1-decade run of an unprecedented bull market that was a place where we felt comfortable to repeat and optimize everything that was leading to our success. Now we are in a period of crisis. In all likelihood, we are going to be in this period of crisis for 2 to 3 months. Crisis isn't good for anyone, but crisis leads to chaos. Chaos is something that we're going to experience for the next 6 to 12 months. And it's a period where the lines blur, where opportunity shifts, where you have permission to fail. And out of chaos, there is a recharting of the path you're on. Once we get to the recharting, what happens is people start getting path dependent again, and they get stuck in their ways. Some companies enter in a brand new path that will take them to new levels of success. Others will fail, others will stay stagnant. But the point that's an interesting takeaway is that chaos is a very important time period that we're about to enter into. So let's take a look at each of these and break them down. First, path dependency. What's the path we were on? To be honest, it's pretty exciting. If you came to Future Festival World Summit in September, we were excitedly talking about mind reading, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and the fact that the world is evolving in a really quick space. You almost forget about that right now because we get so caught up in the doom and gloom and headlines that are bogging us down. But none of this changes. Technology continues to evolve, and we still have an incredible, bright, and exciting future. You still have so much potential within your grasp, and we're about to re-emerge into that era in literally a couple of months. But if I talked to you last year, your likely complaint, if you're an innovator, an insight leader, a CEO, is that you worry that you had so many rules, policies, procedures, structures, and things that were holding you back. The complaints 6 months ago were, we're not big enough to try that new thing. We're not small enough to be nimble. This is not related. We can't do that. We need to focus. We need to hit goals. We want results. And this is what happens in a period of path dependency. It causes us to cling to the path that we're already on. What's unique is that we are exiting that period of path dependency. So now is when you should really start trying to understand the pathways you could be on and what allows you to break free. But when I tell you this, when I show you this chart 5 minutes ago and I said what opportunity lies within your grasp, the problem is it's tough to even get yourself in the mindset right now because we're stuck in crisis. This is the reality of next year for you. Next year is exciting. The next year after that's still exciting. There's so much that you can be doing, but right now it's tough to get there. So crisis is not a good point, and it's not the feature of today's discussion, but I am going to address the elephant in the room. So very quickly, let's just talk about a couple things related to crisis. At a starting point, crisis is not good for any of us, unless you're a mask maker, gun dealer, or a stockpiler of sanitizer. Otherwise, crisis is terrible. But during a crisis, what happens is that consumer needs change by the minute. It doesn't matter if you're in fashion, tech, retail, design. Right now, your consumers' needs are changing by the minute. And actually, during a crisis, consumer needs, they actually get erased because I don't know what I want anymore. Personally, I'm too busy thinking of the bottom levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to actually really be concerned about your product. This means right now in crisis, you can't even research my needs. I cannot possibly tell you what my next year works like because I'm frozen in a really difficult state. A crisis does create a sense of urgency, and I'm going to show you how this can work on a couple different levels, but it sparks us. It creates a sense of cohesion. It aligns us towards a common goal. So I'll go through a couple of the crises that I've gone through in my past, and they're not as significant as COVID, but I'll walk you through how the mentality works on a team. So at Capital One, I, in 2005, was director of the Canadian Business's high-end business unit line. So it was their largest business unit by assets. And that's very exciting. It's exciting. But the interest rates were changing, and the impact was that none of the products my team could offer were viable. Every single product in our portfolio was dead. So a different way of putting it is they put me in the position of director of a business line with 0 products. The goal they had for me was to just find any sort of product and only decline the business by 20%. That's not very motivating, but it's also not different than what many of us might face in the year to come. Having said that, the fact we were in crisis, the fact we didn't have a product we could offer was really interesting to watch and study and be a part of because it created a very different sense of opportunity. Suddenly we could cut through red tape. We didn't have to wait as long to try and get our tests approved. We didn't have to go through as many hurdles for legal and compliance approval. We got to meet our customers. We basically got to accelerate innovation. And here's an example of how that happened. So these are a couple members from my team, Kukamin and Patrick. And what we had done is we set up booths all the way across the country where we would meet with people in the malls, asking them how their needs had evolved. We got our senior leaders trained to pick up the phone and answer calls in the customer complaint line and the customer service line. And what it caused was a much deeper understanding of what people cared about. I personally asked people, what do you think is fair in a bank? What are you looking for in a bank? What actually matters when you're dealing with a bank? And I was surprised by what I learned by just talking to human beings instead of just looking at my research and my surveys. And what came out of this is we started coming up with new product ideas. And then instead of having nothing to offer, we came up with new products that became $1 billion business. And I look back at that and I realized none of it would have been possible without a crisis. So that was my early career, but it taught me crisis creates urgency. And through that process, I spent so much time studying chaos that I got very involved in this. And in my second career crisis, here's how it played out. I had this job at Capital One of hunting ideas, filtering the best, finding opportunity. Hunting ideas, filtering the best, finding opportunity. And that's what I learned how to do. I spent a lot of time in my life just doing this. And I couldn't help but think there'd be a better way to do this online. So in 2005, before YouTube, before Facebook, I coded up a website, Trend Hunter, which is probably how you found this, for people to crowdsource and crowd filter ideas. And many of you have seen or heard a bit of the story, so I'll go very quickly on it. But high level, what happened is that our traffic exploded. It was exciting, and yet we didn't have a business model. So we needed to figure out how to cover these growing costs, servers that are bigger than a person's house. And the things that popped up would be maybe I could consult CEOs. We had an acquisition offer just for the amount of traffic we had. And there was a client from Nestle, Sarah, and she asked, what could I do for her? And I don't know. These were all interesting, but the thing is, what I had started to get good at was growing traffic. That became the path I was dependent on, and that was my comfort zone. So I said no to all of these things and focused so deeply on traffic. Finally, I needed to pay some bills, so that's when I started working with Tony, whose story I told you. And what I didn't really capture or get or internalize, what I didn't understand, what I failed to see, is that all of the large traditional media companies would figure it out. That would disrupt the advertising model for my blog. And then pretty soon I started to enter a period that was troublesome. In fact, we were headed for a pretty big loss and some difficult decisions. But that moment of crisis meant we started scrambling and looking everywhere. Where could we possibly make money to cover the bills? Now, the experience taught me be humble, ask questions, and definitely recognize the blinding power of your own expertise. There I am consulting Tony, but not internalizing that I really need to focus on my own business. And so in that process of desperation, then I found an email from Sarah from Nestle, and she said, hey, if I give you some money, could you do this little trend hunter machine and use it for custom research, presentations, workshops? I didn't even answer her email for 2.5 years. I didn't answer her for 2.5 years because I was focused on my comfort zone. But now in desperation, I thought about it, and we changed how Trend Hunter worked, and I added a little step where humans and AI would use this system in order to help people like Sarah. And in that single year, our little client list went from something tiny to something much bigger, and that was our entire process of reinvention. But when I look at it, I realize none of that was possible without crisis. So why don't we see opportunity until there's crisis? Why do we need something like that? Well, the metaphor that's kind of fun to think about is the boiling frog. They say that if you put a frog into a pot of boiling water, he will hop out immediately and be very angry at you. But if you put that frog into lukewarm water, you can slowly dial up the heat until he croaks. Terrible joke. I'm expecting the comment stream to tell me never to joke like that. But what I mean is we need a shock to realize that something's different. And a different way of thinking of this is that if you look in any industry, from the outside, you can kind of tell what's disrupting the industry. You can see newspapers will be disrupted by blogs, hotels by Airbnb, taxis by Uber. You saw this stuff. But I've worked with hundreds of CEOs now, and I know that in the moment, they don't see that because they've tried things that are like this new disruptive idea. They own all the customers. They have a mastery of the market. And it's too easy to get caught up in your own perfection and miss out unless you have a crisis or a shock. Sometimes to make change happen, you actually need to be shocked. And guess what? That's what's happening right now to all of us. So as much as this is a terrible thing, and I wish I could make it go away, it's terrible, but it is shocking us into action. And if you look historically at the companies and brands that were sort of the great ideas that were overlooked, what you'll notice is that when a great idea is overlooked by a market leader, the reason that idea is overlooked, whether it's Kodak and the digital camera or BlackBerry and the smartphone, the reason great ideas get overlooked is almost exclusively because people overestimate their level of control. They don't have that shock. Crisis creates an urgency, and it creates a desire to research and experiment. Here's an example. So Domino's Pizza in the late 2000 decade was starting to have some problem. By 2008 and 9, the stock price was down 90%. And people did not think that Domino's was going to be delivering pizza anymore. That's what seemed like Domino's end. And pretty soon after, we started working with Domino's. And what's interesting is that when a company has a shock, I know from seeing them, from my work at Capital One, from other experiences, when a company has a shock, they start opening their mind to wanting to test new ideas. In our work with Domino's, what we notice is compared to other clients, because they were in crisis, they were more open to different methods, to different tactics, to testing ideas. And actually, we did more than 144 deep dives into projects that they thought just might work. What I wanted to do is share with you some of the wild projects that Domino's did over the last decade. Let's not forget that Domino's invented the idea of personalizing your pizza and seeing it online. Now you expect that, but a decade ago, Domino's just did it. They made a push-button pizza ordering system. They had role-playing game-inspired pizzas. This one was a Final Fantasy pizza. They had currency-free pizza establishments, live pizza order webcams, foldable pizza ads, digital pizza payments. They had gigantic pizzas that were so big that the delivery people couldn't even possibly figure out how to get that pizza to you. They had takeout pizza insurance policies you could buy. They started using pizza drones and this. For those that haven't seen it, this is an app, and what happens in this app is you have 0 options. You open the app, and in 8 seconds, if you don't close the app, it just places an order for the last pizza that you had. Featureless, optionless order. Wow. Someone even came up with the idea to allow you to order pizza with an emoji. You send an emoji to Domino's Pizza and you get a reply to complete your easy order for $16.27, reply confirmed. Imagine being at a company that was doing well and having someone walk in and say, hey, I have an idea. Maybe you should be able to order pizza with an emoji. Back then, people didn't even know what an emoji was. It's really wild to think of how advanced that thinking was and how much in every other pizza joint people would have rejected that idea. What happened? Well, while they had been down in a trough, experiencing what it was like to have a 90% decline, Domino's rebounded. Domino's rebounded faster than almost any technology company in the last decade. They grew 10,000%. If you had invested $10,000, it would have turned into $1 million from a pizza company. But the reason why is that they pushed hard, they experimented out of crisis, they tried every possible option and they researched it. Companies that think they're doing well are more likely to be protective, repetitive, and complacent. Companies that think they're doing well are more likely to be disrupted. But crisis creates urgency and a desire to both research and experiment. And that's what brings us to chaos. So chaos is where it gets fun. Chaos is where suddenly you can try things. The lines between competitors blur, the permission to fail is suddenly increased, and you have a chance to figure out what's next. But chaos isn't total uncertainty. Chaos is actually predictable. And you might have noticed from the icons I'm choosing that these 6 icons also match up to the 6 patterns of opportunity. Time periods of chaos are like a splash in water. Something big happens and that splash creates ripples of opportunity. If you study the splash, if you look at the mega trends, you can actually identify new opportunities that will emerge. Chaos is actually predictable with method. I walked you through a list of companies that were founded during a period of recession. Let's go one step further and actually take a look at some of the examples. So our first one is Fortune magazine. Fortune was founded in 1929. It was founded, Fortune magazine, founded 4 months into the Wall Street crash. Fortune was priced at $1 an issue, which made it more expensive than any magazine that had ever happened. Fortune was the price of a wool sweater in 1929. And yet, despite being a luxury business publication in the Great Depression, they grew their subscriber base to 500,000 people and they made $7 million of modern day profit during the Great Depression. And that seems counterintuitive, but the reason why was that for the first time, people lost their jobs because of decisions that were being made behind boardroom doors. Fortune offered you a glimpse behind those boardroom doors into how did we end up where we are and when might we emerge. Worded differently, Fortune was simply an answer to a new consumer need. Chaos rule number 1 is that you need to solve a new consumer need. And this brings me to another story from 1929. In 1929, when your grandfather pressed snooze to silence the piercing ringing bells of his alarm clock, he would then get up to kick off his day diving into some grape nuts. Grape nuts was the dominant cereal, the market leader, the mass majority cereal. And if you thought of the word cereal, it meant grape nuts. In 1897, grape nuts was launched. It dominated the market. And here's a little example ad. Men who command great enterprises first master themselves. For food and drink largely define character. Grape nuts. It's a master food for thinkers. Despite the fact, by the way, that as an alarming fact, grape nuts do not contain grapes and they do not contain nuts. But I don't understand what grape nuts are, so let's move on. When this happened, Post, who owned grape nuts, cut their spending, but meanwhile, a hungry tiger lurked about, and that tiger was the heart and soul of Tony the Tiger from Kellogg's. Now, truth be told, Tony the Tiger had not yet been invented, but his spirit had already begun in Will Keith Kellogg, a man, a founder who realized that change creates opportunity. And when everybody else cut ad spending, Kellogg's decided to double and then quadruple ad spending. And what happened was that by the end of the Great Depression, when your grandpa silence that piercing alarm clock. Instead of diving into Post Grape Nuts, well, he started diving into Kellogg's Corn Flakes. And thereafter, the entire Kellogg's cereal empire began. Chaos rule number 2 is that you can thrive when others retreat. So let's use an example. Let's pretend that you and I decided we wanted to start an ice cream company. We would do the research, and the market research would lead us to figure out that we should identify the flavors of ice cream that we should offer. We do that research, and pretty quickly we might figure out, hey, the most popular flavor of ice cream is vanilla. And so we might make a stable of flavors, but one of those flavors should probably be vanilla. The problem with a period of recession and chaos is that you don't care who you get your vanilla ice cream from, and neither do I. It could be that brand, it could be that brand, it could be that person's brand. During a period of recession and change, brand loyalty evaporates, and we get to the functional usefulness and reward of the actual product. So in 1991, which was a period of global economic recession, during the 91 recession, Ben & Jerry's launched Cherry Garcia. Cherry Garcia was priced 4 times higher than probably any other vanilla ice cream you could have seen in the store. But throughout that recession and thereafter, the ice cream brand grew from 4 to 10 times larger. And by the end of the recession, they sold to Unilever for $330 million. In the words of Jerry Garcia himself, you do not merely want to be the best of the best, you want to be considered one of the only ones who does what it is that you do. Worded differently, chaos rule number 3 is that you need to be irresistible to a specific group of people. Be irresistible to a specific group of people. Now, how do you figure that out? Well, we got a lot of innovation in the world. The threat is that chaos can make inspiration seem distracting because we have all the innovations we could track. We have our customers, our competitors, our strategies, everything's changing by the minute. So the problem that starts to happen is that people start to skip steps and rely on gut instinct in order to find their new ideas. You cannot rely on gut instinct in a time of recession and market change because your gut instinct is based on the past and the past is wrong. Everything has changed. So what actually has to happen is you need to recognize chaos rule number 4, that chaos changes the rules, it reshuffles the deck, and it switches who's in the lead. And the only way out is actually to methodically figure out how to scan the market, the new innovations, your customers, your competitors, and strategies, identify the new opportunities that start to emerge. Now, a common question I often get when people are trying to innovate, whether you're a chief marketing officer at a Fortune 500 or leading the tech division, or you're a marketing manager, or you're an SVP. All the different levels of people in an organization are trying to get buy-in. Even the CEOs are trying to get buy-in to get people to follow. What's unique about this time period is that there's a lot of momentum and desire for you to innovate and change. The story I like to use is like this. When you find something you're good at in any market in a normal time, it's like finding a hill of opportunity. And at any given point in time, you can innovate and you can optimize and you can test. And we get into a system where we start looking for the peak of the hill that we're on. We climb just a little bit higher. And after doing hundreds and thousands of tests in whatever market you're in, you get really good at figuring out what the peak of the hill is. The problem with being on the peak of the hill is that when you try anything new, by comparison, it seems worse. So if I use the example of Smith Corona, who invented the laptop word processor, grammar checker, spell checker, computers, and many different form factors, they were actually better at typewriters. So at any given time, they could make a better typewriter. And when they tried making a computer, it just seemed like something that was too difficult. So they retreated back to making typewriters. And they had a bit of computer experiments, but they abandoned them. And 3 years after doing that, they declared bankruptcy, and their joint venture partner in making computers was Acer, went on to become the second largest PC maker in the world. The way you end up as Acer and not Smith Corona is to recognize that you get stuck on a hill, but there are other larger hills of opportunity. The difficulty is that to get to a larger hill of opportunity, you need to cross through the valley. You need to innovate through the difficult times like right now. At the BBC, Innovation, British Broadcasting Corporation, innovation meant coming up with TV show ideas. And when they looked at this problem of optimizing on the hill, what happened was the CEO and CFO wanted to make the TV shows better, and they were losing market share. And so the CEO and CFO put in rigid controls. And they wanted everyone that was innovating to follow a set system and pattern of which shows worked and which ones did. Anyone that's a creative person on this webcast knows that rigid controls don't work for innovation and creativity. Innovation narrowed and they lost even more market share. When that happens, the only upside is you get a new CEO and CFO. And the new two came in and they didn't want to change everything about the system and the rigid controls. So instead they did one little change, which is that they put in a gambling fund. And the gambling fund was simple. It was the idea that new concepts which failed the screening process could still qualify for gambling fund money. And one of the ideas that got gambling fund money was The Office, which went on to become the biggest hit in BBC's history. Chaos rule number 7 is that you need to find a way to create a gambling fund. And you'll have more buy-in than you think because every CEO is trying to innovate and survive and make things happen. But you could also word this differently. A gambling fund could be a fund for trying new things. It could also be managing innovation like it's a stock portfolio, trying to think of how you have some conservative moves as well as some higher risk bets in order to help you reinvent during these times of chaos and change. You'll have the support. Literally, the last survey from PwC was that 97% of CEOs said innovation was one of their top 4 most important pillars. So every CEO wants innovation to happen. The problem is that people aren't always suggesting ideas and innovation isn't studied and people don't have the tactics, and that's where you come in. You can come in, drive the strategy, come up with the ideas, and recognize that right now you have more permission to innovate than you think. Right now, you have more permission to experimentally fail than you think. And right now, you have more permission than you think to actually try to save the company. So I'll do a little case study for you. COVID-19 is something that large corporations are going to figure out. They're going to survive. Politicians will figure out. There might be some change-ups, but what makes my heart break is thinking of all the small businesses that you drive by on your way to work, the restaurants, the bars, the little shops. And unfortunately, so many of these shops operate day to day, month to month. They pay their bills on time for revenue to come in and just cover those bills. So the case study I wanted to do was I want you to personally think right now of what is your favorite little restaurant. Maybe it's one a friend owns, maybe it's one in your neighborhood, maybe it's the one you go for your romantic date on once a month. But think of your favorite restaurant and how we could reinvent it. Now, the pattern for reinventing in times of chaos all relates to the patterns, sorry to duplicate the word, but the way to reinvent in a time of chaos is to study the patterns of innovation and opportunity. So I'm going to rip through these, and the basic premise is that you can use patterns to brainstorm how chaos will change your market. You can look at reduction and how the world gets simpler. Here's the first example. In reduction, we think about what's actually important to your end consumer. It's not about big ideas. It's about finding little ideas you can make big by studying what's actually important to your consumer. So if we're looking at the restaurant world, what's important right now? Well, I guess it's food. So the example of Earl's restaurant chain in Western Canada is they realize if food's so important and people can't get food, they changed their chain over to become a grocery and prepared meal delivery shop. They now offer prepared meals, chef kits to help you actually make a delicious meal, home essentials that you might not have as easy access to, like toilet paper and produce packs. Wow, that's the example of reduction and how that could help a local restaurant. Different example, acceleration. You take one concept and you make it really amazing. You take a little idea that your customers love and you make it bigger, better, smarter, and more exciting. So here's where we'll let you know just a little bit about me. I love croissants more than anything. You know, you can't get a croissant. Right now, you can't. All the good bakeries are broken. In Toronto, there's one, though, that figured out a way to keep the bakery going. It's called Hadrian Verrier Patisserie. And this morning, when I woke up, for my birthday, I found out that my lovely fiance had found that Hedrin Verrier is actually selling the frozen baked material, and they're making croissants that you can recreate in the comfort of your own home. Instead of spending 5 hours, you can have the delicious croissant that you cook, and they're providing the new meals up front. Maybe something they'll continue after this ends. What about Divergent? You take a look at what you have, what you're capable of, and you try to find a completely different need that you could solve. Instead of marketing to the masses, you find a way to be irresistible to a specific group of people. Well, if you're a restaurant or a bar or a distillery, you might realize there's a lot of new needs that are very obvious. One of those new needs, hand sanitizer. So there's actually about a dozen different vodka distilleries that realized hand sanitizer was pretty easy for them to make with the raw ingredients that they have. This one, Corsair, now has their own line of hand sanitizer, and instead of pumping out vodka, they're helping keep the world safe by simply looking at what the world wants right now. Next up, we could look at convergence. Convergence is the concept that your next idea exists in some combination of things that you already know. NX Market is a market in Toronto that a friend of mine, Corey, has started. And actually, I'm fortunate that my fiance is on their board of directors. And what they're doing is using jars to get rid of plastic waste and connect you from the farmer to an actual store location where you could sort of recreate the era of the milkman and get your produce. But what's interesting right now is that they've realized there's a lot of chefs and caterers that are out of business. So their new pivot is that they've created a place for chefs and caterers to actually bring their food and have prepackaged meals people can recreate in the comfort of their own home. Next up, let's look at redirection. Well, redirection is when you surprise, gamify, or reinvent what's happening now for your consumer, and you reinvent now in a different way for a later payoff in the future. You don't have perfect examples, but now is when you would figure out how to channel your tribe. We've seen some restaurants create gift card promotions. You could switch it up and have a more rewarding point program or pay it forward. There's a couple of restaurants that let you buy not just a pre-prepared meal for yourself, but also creating gifts for the homeless. This brings me to cyclicality, my final pattern here, and the simplicity here is that everything old is new again. And out of the 2008 recession, the research that we had done with American Express realized that during the 2008 recession, there was a return to the kitchen because people were trying to realize what was important to them and families surfaced up. But right now we've got a lot of family time happening, but once we emerge from this, we're gonna rethink about that quality time we've spent with our family, and we're gonna think about how to create these celebrated meals and make them happen. So my last example for a restaurant is you could think about the return to a kitchen as a way to actually empower that meal and bring back traditions that would actually make this quarantine life seem like it is fun and rewarding. I'll wrap part of this up to note, chaos causes the patterns to accelerate. So what you do as a workshop is you would take what you're working on, look at your problem from different perspectives. We'll give you the links to all of this material, and you use these methods in order to research out what the new opportunities could be as our world takes itself into the next stage, which is chaos. If you want an extra little workshop as homework, another way to think about how to evolve once we emerge is to think of a sample of companies. Here I picked Uber, Google, Amazon, Patagonia. They might be totally unrelated to your industry, but as a creative exercise, what you do is you think about how would Google enter your industry? If you're a restaurant, how would they do that? What about Uber? What about Amazon? What about Patagonia? And as you think through the exercise of how random companies would approach your problem, what you're actually doing is tricking your mind to look at your problem from different perspectives to better find out where you're strong and where you're weak. So we're gonna do a couple questions. We've got some time for some Q&A, but first I'll wrap up with a couple little notes. Crisis is not good for any of us, but crisis does create urgency. In fact, it leads us to chaos, and chaos creates opportunity. Chaos changes the rules. Chaos switches who's in the lead. So you need in this time to figure out how you're solving a new consumer need. And if you do so, you can thrive when others retreat. Find a way to be irresistible to a specific group of people. Perhaps to get that started, you need to create a gambling fund or think about managing innovation and creativity of your own time in your company as if it was a stock portfolio. But recognize in these times you have more permission to innovate, more permission to fail, and straight up more permission to be the one thinking about how to save the company. This brings me to the final phase, which is the recharting. And the recharting is what's next. The recharting is the simple notion that once we exit this, as you get into the end of 2020, thank God, or 2021, you will find yourself identifying new paths that you could be on. So what opportunity is so close within your grasp, and what do you want out of this? How will you use this time to dream of a bigger role, a new product, a new service, or more simply just a different way of doing things? If you want to dive further, I think a lot of you are on this podcast or this webcast because we sent you a book or you already had the book, but this is a 360-page textbook of how to navigate chaos. So that's my easy answer if you want to dive further. Just so you know the framework, what we dove into today was a lot about how to think about change, but we're going to do another free webcast in 2 weeks, which will be led by Jamie Neely, our Chief Culture Officer, and she's going to walk you how to think about the rewritten rules of work and work from home. Then we're going to do another webcast that's led by our Chief Insight Officer, Armida Ascano, and she's going to go through the 18 mega trends in a post-COVID world. And actually, everything in our future festivals and everything related to our work is now all about what happens in a post-COVID world and a changed consumer mindset. So that's going to be a really fascinating exercise to see how the world's reshaping. And then I'll probably come back with some workshops and infectious messaging, but those are still a few weeks away. So wait till we actually get there. If you want a next step of stuff that you can do today, tomorrow, we also took our Future Festival, put it all online with Future Festival Virtual. And if you're a client, you can get access to all of our e-learning already, or you can check it out and just contact us if you want to figure out how to get involved. If you really want to rank things up to the next level, once we emerge from this, we have 1 to 4 day recession ready programs where we'd help you work through these problems. And if you want to do that in a simple, fun way with a lot of people, our Future Festival in November, our New World Summit, is actually going to be a chaos edition, which is entirely about becoming recession ready, finding your next steps, and plotting out your pivot. So I'll wrap this up, noting chaos creates opportunity, but it also is the time where you get to think about how you will create the future. This brings me to the Q&A time, but I thank you for spending my birthday with me, and I hope you found some of the ideas and nuggets in here useful as we think about how to embrace this wild world that we're in. All right, so we'll open up for Q&A. Jonathan Brown's been taking a look at questions that have been streaming in, and I'm excited to provide you any ideas that you might find useful.
Okay, so just to start off with, there's a lot of questions, and I don't know if everyone was watching the chat or came in at different times, but we will be sending a video of this webinar out to all of you afterwards. So I know that, excuse me, we gave you a lot today, so don't worry about it. We're gonna send you the video. Everything that you saw on screen will be included in the video. We're not sending out the deck, but we will send out the video, so you'll be able to go back and pause and get all that down. So one question here we have is, can companies call a crisis even when none exists just to shift into crisis mode and reinvent?
Figuring out a way to spark a crisis is the most useful thing you can possibly do. Now, right now, we've all been handed one, but in other instances, there's a range of how you can do it. If you're a .com and things are brand new, I've heard fun examples where people actually even create a fake competitor in order to dramatize what that competitor might do. If you have something that's providing tension on the business, find a way to make that real and involve people. But the simplicity is that having something that is a crisis is usually terrible and daunting. The only upside is that you can actually use crisis to spark everyone together and help you think about how to actually come together to solve real problems. So I wouldn't do it in a manipulative way, but I do think it's safe to let everyone know of the problems that threaten your business and to try and think about how to come together and basically spark urgency. Oh, I can't hear you, Jonathan. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so we got one person that's calling you on your stuff. They're like, all right, so what are you doing? So aside from hosting webinars like this, how is Trend Hunter actually adapting to the current chaos?
Sure. So right now, Trend Hunter's business has always been about our future festivals and our live in-person workshops from me and a dozen other speakers and our research. So with 2 of those 3 businesses out of commission, we're focusing really hard on our research programs. We're pivoting everything to be about recession readiness. We've rethemed our Future Festival conference to be about creating your pivot plans. And with some of our largest core clients, we've been plotting out what happens when they return to their office, to run sort of 1 to 4 day sessions where we help them sort of half learn new tactics for chaos, but half actually prototype what's next. So we're working at that pretty hard. As a team, we've also switched to 4 days a week, which isn't necessarily what everyone wants right now, but for us, that's the best way to think about thriving in a time that's difficult. I would say for us, working from home is tough. But once we are out and we're in a recession mode, then we're all super excited, because right now clients have extraordinary demands for research. And so we want to just get through this one little awkward period, let this virus go away, and then get back in office to help all of you think about your own creative strategies.
A lot of questions here about how to convince management of the safe to fail mentality.
The best ways to convince your leadership about being safe in failure is to compartmentalize the size of the gamble, either with the gambling fund or using that example of innovation as a stock portfolio. In Create the Future, I actually have a whole section, and I personally love it because of my finance background. Hopefully it doesn't bore you too much, but it's about 4 or 5 pages on how to think about innovation and creativity in your life and in your company and your team, like your stock portfolio. And the reason why I find that really interesting is that when it's real life, innovation and failure seems scary, but when it's your stock portfolio or you look at finance, people understand that higher risk equals higher reward. It's just that you contain things a little bit just to make sure that you don't have too big of a loss. And there's actually 2 really interesting concepts in finance that I hope all of you will find inspiring. And they are about gambling as it relates to finance. And it's the gambler, the house's money, and the snake bite. So here's the house's money. The house's money is that if you're a gambler and you win a whole bunch of money, you start to think that money doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the casino. And then you make irrationally bad bets afterwards because you're just giving the money away as if it wasn't yours. In the reverse effect, when times are bad or you have a really big loss, maybe like right now, you feel like a snake bit you. And the snake bite effect is that people make irrationally conservative decisions and then they miss out. Now in finance and investing, you realize that you need the portfolio approach so that you don't end up letting house's money or snake bite take away your ability to innovate. And I think in your company and your creative time yourself, you need to do the same. How can you compartmentalize your bets to make sure you have some amount of your time or your team's time or even money looking for what's next, and then some other portion on things that seem safer, and you will be unlikely to meet a CEO and a CFO that don't buy into that strategy. That is a measured tactical approach to making sure that you help us through this chaos without having too much risk.
Okay, great. We have another question here. I would love to hear what Jeremy anticipates 3 of the largest consumer behavior shifts that will be coming out of as a result of COVID.
Sure. So we had done a lot of research and with big surveys and polls in the 2008 recession. And one of the things that popped up to the very top was a term that we'd called potentialism, which is this concept that once you go through a crisis, if you are at home, working from home right now in isolation, like everyone in the world, it's really, really tough. And once you break out of this, potentialism will kick in, which is the concept that you will want to live life to its full potential. And that causes a couple of effects. One of them is that you'll see a surge in hobby businesses and crafts and boomers who are saying, you know what, I worked so hard in this one career, now I wish to try something that actually gives me meaning and purpose. You'll see that return to the kitchen for that family meal. And you will actually see that there will also be a surge of supercharged tourism, which is to say, right now, I can't travel. I'll be scared for a little bit, but once I'm free, I'm doing that trip in Africa and I'm volunteering. I'm doing that wild adventure. So that all would wrap up in something called potentialism. The second trend that I'll give you that I think is really interesting is an awareness of the environment. If I was a Gen Z and I'm at home and I already thought that the generations in control have ruined our world and the environment, which they already did, then I'll probably think something similar about what's happening with this virus. This virus is a reminder that we are little insignificant people in a giant blue marble globe that keeps us alive and supports us. It reminds us of our size in comparison to the planet. And what I believe is that there will be a new rise of awareness of just how significant the importance of the environment is. If you think about flattening the curve in a virus situation, think about it in in an environmental situation. And actually, my fiance, Taylor Click, in her business, which is all eco and sustainability, she's got that same little curve, and they've been thinking about it in terms of how to flatten the curve with the environment, because that's actually a much bigger curve to threaten. And the final example that I'll give you would be in terms of how the world changes. Big businesses will survive, but unfortunately there's going to be a really big turnover in the small businesses. And I think that's sad. And so I would push you, without extrapolating that trend too much, to just say, do everything you can to support the little businesses in your neighborhood, because you need right now to help them to survive, because they don't have the same access to capital that a big bank might have. And yet they're the ones that you love most on your morning commute or your weekend sort of latte time.
Jer, here's a great question. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering generally, but then especially at a time like this, how can we differentiate between the short-term opportunities driven by short-term shifts in needs versus things that will persist over time?
So there's a reshuffling of the deck. So what happens is that I would definitely separate out this current period of crisis from chaos. So in this 2 to 3 month period, it's really tough to understand any consumer need. And that relates to the slide I showed on the Maslow hierarchy of need thing, which is just saying, I don't personally know what I want. I don't know when this ends. I'm just thinking of my family and having my birthday in our office studio all by myself. That is a really, really weird world, and I can't wait to get home to seclusion and join my partner so we can have our 2-person evening. What a weird world. And so short term, there's not too much you can deduce from this straight up. You can start to plan and research and prepare. But once we emerge and we're back in our office, then you want to put a lot of effort into trying to research those beginning trails of each of the trends that will take off. And it's similar to any instance where you're trying to study a trend. There's a much bigger method, and we may get into that in a later webinar because that's where we spend our business. But the core of our trend spotting method is that you're not looking for one little flash in a pan. You're trying to look for examples where you can see 5 or 10 examples of something that's similar, a cluster. And if you can find a cluster of several examples or ideas that seem to suggest that you have a theme, then you have something larger you can build a business on, and you would try your ideas and you would keep on honing them. But you're looking for clusters of ideas wherever possible. Not the giant mega trend, because everyone knows them, and not the individual little ideas, but these themes of multiple examples that are occurring all at once.
This is cool. So if let's say I do everything that you've told me to do, and I'm able to, reinvent through a crisis. Crisis ends. Should I go back to my regular services? How do I think about what the previous version of my business's identity was versus what I got to during the crisis?
I would get back to servicing your customers, but I would do it with absolute paranoia. I would, even if your business revenues bounce back within a week or two, I would be in a total paranoia mode, knowing that all the research I did, all the experimentation I did, everything I did last year has completely changed. Like in a research world, I say this as a guy running a research company, I would worry that everything that I just did is done. Because your consumer's mindset's entirely different now. They might still be buying your product, but it doesn't mean that they like it the same way they did. Their needs have entirely changed. Their perception on what's important has entirely changed. And I would feel that urgency, even if my revenues bounce back. I would be very carefully trying to study my consumer, talk to them, figure out what they want. And if you have smaller competitors in your region or in your industry that previously had love, recognize the little guys right now, destroy. Because people already thought of option 1 versus the little guy that kind of satisfied them. And when you go through a chaos period, what happens is that the little guy accelerates and jumps to the top. There's a Harvard article, I think it's from Clayton Christensen, but I hope not to misquote, but it says that disruption always happens in 3 levels. First, there's a little company and it does something and nobody cares. If we think of computers, it's the Atari video game machine. No one really cares, doesn't matter. But then the next step is that those companies, the little companies that seem awkward, start to get a bit of traction, but you don't care. You're Smith Corona. You make the best typewriters in the world. You don't care about these little computer machines. They're irrelevant. You own the competitor. Step 3 is the knockout punch, and it always happens in disruption. In step 3, what happens is that little or medium-sized company gets an alliance or gets an investment or gets a strategic partner, and then they come out and they're the knockout punch. And that's how disruption happens. So if I was in my office and I was returning back to work, I would be extraordinarily paranoid about how the competitive landscape is about to shake up.
Great. Well, so that brings us to time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This was great, lively. Jerry, you were doing your thing, so you couldn't see the chat, but the chat was going wild. Really appreciate all the questions. Like Jeremy said, we are going to be doing a couple of these over the next couple of weeks. The next one is in 2 weeks. I think some of the questions, there was actually a question here. I'll throw this last one to you. Why can't I get the copy of your book on the newest version of Kindle yet, Jeremy?
Oh my gosh. Create the Future is a physical book, and it is full of visuals and graphics and charts paired with a second book. And it really is meant to be a physical book. So it's available on Kindle. We redid it, so technically it's up there, but I'm actually getting slayed. I feel so bad because my versions on Kindle don't turn out as well. So on Amazon, I have a lot of great reviews, and then like a quarter of the people have a Kindle and they say it's formatted bad. So I'm getting slayed there. So if you want to help me out, give me an Amazon review for the book. It's not about Kindle. But otherwise, I guess it's there. It's just meant to be a physical little inspirational guidebook for your desk.
So on that note, surprise announcement is that we will be gifting everyone the first chapter of that book in a coming email to all the registrants here. So you'll be able to get a taste of what that all reads like. Any parting messages from you, Jeremy?
No, but we'll give you the first chapter of Create the Future, the first 2 chapters of the Innovation Handbook. We have a new trend report we'll give you called The New Normal, which people have been liking, which is about 20 of the trends as the world changes. But otherwise, I would be inspired. Crisis is terrible. I know that there's nothing good in crisis, but the next era we get into is chaos. It's coming very soon. It creates opportunity. And for those of you that care about trends, care about innovation, care about creativity, now is when you can actually start to motor. Now is when you will define your career. You will not feel the same constraints of being stuck to the path and really trying to get buy-in. You're about to enter an era of experimentation and creativity. And the very fact you logged in for this webinar means you're someone that's well positioned to thrive in that sort of era. So thank you so much for spending my birthday talking about all this. And I hope you got some ideas today that will inspire you to create the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.